got another first and favourites video for you today, and today it's the subgenre edition, part 2. Now, a couple of weeks ago I recorded part 1 where I covered off 8 of my favourite subgenres of romance, which included mafia, dark, sports, monster, small town, erotic and omegaverse. And at the end of that video I promised that I'll be back in a couple of months time with part 2, where I'd be covering off some more of my favourite subgenres of romance. However, I've had to switch my schedule around a little bit, so I'm bringing this video to you earlier than I originally anticipated. So like I said, today we have part 2. So in my first and favourites videos, what I like to do is talk about the very first book I read, and then my favourite one in a particular category. Today, like I say, we're talking subgenres. When I'm talking the first book I ever read, it may not have been strictly the first book that I've ever read in this subgenre, but it's the first one that I can either remember reading or since I started recording the books that I read, which goes back as far as 2021. So to get us started today, I'm going to talk about MC romances. So that's motorbike club romances, where the heroes or heroines are part of a motorbike club. Now, the first one I ever remember reading was Chase by Hart and D.B. West, and it was a book that I read back in 2021. Now, I don't remember too much about this book, and I didn't go on to read any more in the series, although I do remember quite liking it and being intrigued about book number 2. But like I say, I never did go on to read any more in the series. So Chase is actually book 1 in the Savage Kings MC, and in that book we were following Sasha and Chase. Now, like I said, I don't remember too much about this one, but I know that it's a second chance romance, and the concept was that Chase and Sasha had known each other growing up. They'd had some kind of romance, and 10 years before the start of this book, something had happened and they ended up splitting up. And I think Sasha was pretty much left broken-hearted, and it may have been that Chase had to leave her in order to keep her safe. Well, 10 years later, Sasha is actually a journalist, and things have been kicking off with the MC and a rival gang, and things have not gone too well. And so Torrin, which is the sort of the name of book 2 in this series, Torrin is actually the leader of this MC, but something very terrible happens, and he is now off on a revenge mission, and we catch up with him in book 2 to figure out what's going on. So in the meantime, Chase, who is sort of second in command, if you like, has to step up and kind of lead this MC. And while all of this is sort of kicking off, like I say, Sasha is investigating because she's a journalist, and kind of their paths cross once more, and they're kind of reunited 10 years later. So this is a second chance romance, like I said, and their relationship is going to go from there. So in terms of my favourite MC romance, now I haven't read too many, I must be honest. I do enjoy an MC romance, but I don't read them all the time, and I have read a couple of different authors, a couple of different series, but probably my favourite series, which I haven't even finished, I've only read 4 books in this series, is the Fallen Men series by Giana, and probably my favourite that I've read so far is book 2, which is Welcome to the Dark Side. And in this one we are following obviously Zeus, who is the leader of the Fallen Men MC, and his woman Lulu. Now this is also an age gap. It's quite a large age gap between these two, so therefore it's kind of a forbidden romance as well, because essentially what happens in this book is that Zeus is in a kind of a shootout with another gang, and there is a little girl called Lulu who kind of is in the wrong place at the wrong time, and Zeus ends up saving her life and protecting her while the bullets are flying, and as a result he is still in the area when the police turn up and they arrest him, and he ends up going to prison. But Lulu remembers this amazing man who is, you know, very tall, very attractive, covered in tattoos, but what she remembers most is that he is her hero and that he rescued her. And so she starts to write to him in prison, and this relationship is very innocent to start off with. Obviously she's just a very young girl, but they start to have build this friendship through letters that she writes to him in prison. Now Lulu goes through some difficult times herself because she finds out that she has cancer, and so she also writes to Zeus while he's in prison about her experience with that, and so he not only builds his friendship with her but becomes very kind of protective of her and wanting to help her get better. Now finally he comes out of prison and Lulu plucks up the courage to tell him that she's fallen in love with him, and of course Zeus is like, no, this cannot happen, you are far too young, and tries to kind of push Lulu away, but she is very determined and she's very persistent, and Zeus cannot help himself but also recognise how beautiful and caring and kind this woman is, and then obviously they end up in a relationship together, and I really do like this one. Like I say, it is kind of a forbidden romance, but also they are a fantastic couple together. Lulu really cares about Zeus, and you know, they have a very good romance together, but also what I really like about this series as a whole and this book as a whole is just the kind of like the found family element, how everyone in the club, you know, really sticks together, and the other stories and other characters that we find out more about and grow to know and love, and how Zeus and Lulu are kind of then the, you know, the mum and dad, as it were, of this whole group. So really enjoy this one. If you like an MC romance, you haven't read this one yet, I highly recommend. Okay, so the second category of subgenre I've got today is historical romances. Now I used to read quite a few historical romances growing up while I was a little girl, because my mum had a lot of Mills and Boons, you know, the kind of bodice ripper sort of romances, but I can't clearly remember one that stands out in my mind. But one of the first ones I've read since I've been kind of making a note of the books that I've been reading is Surrender to Sin by Nicola Davidson. Now this is book one of the Fallen series, and it's a series of 3 books that are actually all novellas, and this is just a short historical romance, about 122 pages. And it's also kind of like an erotic historical romance as well, because essentially this whole series revolves around this sort of Victorian sex club, if you like. And the heroes are all kind of part owners or frequenters of the club. And so the main hero in this one is Lord Sebastian St. John. Now he is a very wealthy man. He's inherited a lot of money from his family, but he was left an orphan, and he's kind of decided that he isn't gonna get himself a wife, and that he's gonna very much stay a single man and just, you know, enjoy the club that he owns and the women that he has access to. And then we have our heroine in this one, Lady Grace Carrington, and basically she is about to be arranged in marriage to a very much older gentleman, and she isn't interested in marrying this guy, and she decides that she's going to go to basically the sex club, and basically as a bit of a defiance, as a bit of a rebellion, she's going to enjoy herself for 2 weeks, and also in the hope that she's going to ruin her reputation and therefore somehow stop this marriage. And of course when she gets there, she meets our hero, who everyone calls Sin, and he is going to agree to help her ruin her reputation, but of course once they start a bit of a fling, then they're not going to be able to stop, and their romance goes from there. So then in terms of my favourite that I've read, it's a recent read, and it was When the Earl Met His Match by Stacy, Reid, and I really did enjoy this one. It's book 4 by the Wedded by Scandal series, and we are following a hero called Hugh, who is the future Earl of Albury, and Lady Phoebe, basically, who is the daughter of a duke. Now the premise of this one again is that Phoebe is going to be arranged in marriage to a much older gentleman who is suited to her, you know, her class, her status in society, but Phoebe doesn't want to marry him, and in fact she is in love with somebody else who happens also to be her piano teacher, and she kind of ruins herself by giving her virginity to this man in the hopes that then her father will be swayed and will allow her to marry the piano teacher rather than having to marry this duke. However, when her family finds out, they are not at all happy, and they pay the piano teacher off to disappear and never come back, so that she can still marry the person that they want her to marry. The thing is, from that first encounter, she is now pregnant, and so she has to tell her mother, and her mother basically has a plan to ship her off to the country until she's given birth, and then they're going to put the baby into, you know, like an orphanage. Of course, Phoebe doesn't want this to happen to her child at all, and so she has to take drastic action. This is where Hugh comes into the equation, because Hugh is a son of an Earl, but he is not the biological son of the Earl, and although the Earl has claimed him as his own, there is a lot of rumours that his mother had an affair and slept with somebody else. And of course this is very scandalous, and to protect his family from scandal, the current Earl has basically moved away from London, so they're no longer in the limelight of the Ton, and they now live in an estate in Scotland. The Earl himself is elderly, and he knows he's not going to be around for much longer, so he really wants Hugh, his son, to get back into society basically and take his rightful place as the new Earl. The other thing about Hugh is that he is a mute hero. He doesn't speak, and basically communicates through sign language. So what he actually does, he decides that he is going to try and find himself a wife by putting an advert into the local paper. So he puts this advert in the paper to say he's looking for a wife, and she has to be, you know, a lady of high standing. And this is perfect because Phoebe sees this advert in the paper and she thinks, great, he is the future Earl. This could be the man to save me, and she basically then runs off to Scotland to try and convince Hugh to marry her. And of course, when she gets there, Hugh does agree to marry her, but it's going to be an arranged marriage, like a marriage of convenience between these two, and he vows that he's not going to fall in love. And also, at first she's quite worried about telling him that she's pregnant, but of course Hugh is also very sympathetic to her cause around this matter as well, since as I said earlier, he isn't the biological son of the Earl, so kind of completely understands how important it is for the baby to be claimed and loved as his own, and he is absolutely prepared to do that. Of course, when these two get together and they start to learn about each other and you know, are in close proximity together, it's not going to be too long until they start to fall in love. And I just thoroughly enjoyed this whole story and the setting and these two characters, and I really was rooting for these two to be together. Next up then, we've got paranormal romances, and I really love this subgenre of romance. One of the sort of paranormal romance writers that I really have enjoyed over the years is Sherilyn Kenyon, and I've read pretty much most of the books that she's written up to more recent years, when she has sort of stopped writing due to personal reasons. But the very first one that I read was Fantasy Lover, and this one was kind of book 0, I would say, in the Dark Hunter series. Now the Dark Hunter series, there's a lot of books, there's like 20 plus books in this series, so it is quite an investment. And this particular book, like I say, Fantasy Lover, it is considered book 0. If you look at it on Amazon, it's not book 1, but it's definitely the first one that's set in this universe, but it is slightly different to the others. However, the characters in the story you do continue to see in later books. So in this one, we are following Julian of Macedon, who basically was a Spartan, and Grace. The kind of premise of this one is that Julian of Macedon had like this curse placed on him, where he now lives in a book, and he's been inside this book for 2,000 years. There is a spell that a woman can conduct, perform, that brings him out of this book, and basically his then reason to be is to spend 1 whole month with this woman and basically pleasure her in bed. But he's cursed to do this over and over again, so as women through the years have said the spell, he comes out, he spends a month with them, they have an absolutely fantastic time. At the end of the month, he then has to go back into the book, and you know, has to wait then until another woman calls upon his services. So like I said, he's been trapped in this book for 2,000 years, and Grace is the person who basically says the spell one day and gets him out of the book. The thing is, she's quite an unusual sort of woman, and normally these women cannot resist him. One, because they know what spell they're performing, they're deliberately, you know, summoning him to have a good time, and she isn't really even sure what the spell is for. She doesn't believe it's kind of really true, and so she is a bit taken aback when he basically turns up after she's performed this spell, and isn't quite sure what to do with him. Now, like I say, normally the women are completely, you know, head over heels, completely lustful over him, but Grace is a little bit different, and she holds back and basically doesn't want to, you know, have a sexual relationship with him straight away, wants to get to know him a bit better and figure out what is actually going on. And when she learns about the curse, she endeavours to basically break the curse, but in order to break the curse, the woman has to go the whole month without actually sleeping with Julian, and if she can do that, basically, then the curse can be broken. There's a couple of other little things in there as well that they have to do in order to break the curse, but that is pretty much the summary of what happens. But of course, this curse also means that as they spend more time together, their chemistry and their connection gets stronger and stronger and stronger, so it gets harder to resist, basically. So is Grace going to be strong enough to hold back and not sleep with this guy for an entire month? So like I said, I enjoyed this first book, but the rest of the series gets better and better and better. So if you want to read some sort of old school paranormal romances, I would definitely recommend Sherilyn Kenyon. I think she's fantastic, and there's a lot of books to get your teeth into. More recently, I have been reading a variety of paranormal. It's not like a really kind of big subgenre for me, because as you know, I mostly stick to mafia and dark romances now, but I do like to read the odd paranormal romance, and my favourite that I've read in the last couple of years is this one here, which is Resting Witch Face by Juliette, and this is book 5 in her Stay a Spell series. So this whole series is set in New Orleans. It's kind of like modern day kind of New Orleans, and we have witches and vampires and werewolves, and also Grimms in here as well. Book 5 though is basically focused around 2 characters. Jules, who is a witch, and in fact she is head of the witches in New Orleans, and we also have Reuben, who is head of the vampires. Now, what I absolutely loved about this one is that we know about these characters in the first 4 books. They're definitely pining for each other, because Reuben and Jules basically used to be in a relationship. They were madly in love with each other, but something happened and we don't know what, which basically meant that they separated, but they've both been pining for each other for 12 years, so they've been apart for 12 years, and really this book is their sort of second chance at romance. It tells the tale of how they kind of get back together. And so I really enjoyed this one, because I was anticipating this couple right from book 1 really, and it didn't disappoint at all. I absolutely loved it when they finally got together. Essentially, and what happens in this one though is lots of stuff has been going on in the series up until this point, but we also know that the werewolves are kind of second-class citizens amongst the paranormal community, and 2 of Jules's sisters have recently, you know, married werewolves, and she is trying to get them kind of like equal rights, if you like, within the paranormal community. So her and Reuben, as you know, head of witches, head of the vampires from New Orleans, decide that they're kind of going to go on a bit of a road trip to meet with other covens around America and eventually go to England, basically to you know, convince people to give the werewolves a chance. Obviously while they're on this road trip together, they get in close proximity together, but they also start to kind of like discover more kind of about what's going on, and there might be some baddies that are, you know, causing problems basically, and they might be getting themselves into a little bit of hot water. So that's all I'm going to say about that. But like I say, it's probably my favourite paranormal book that I've read in the last couple of years. Really enjoyed it and would highly recommend this whole series. So next up is romances, and the very first one that I read was a book called Absolution by Sloane Kennedy, and this is book 1 in her Protectors series. Basically it's a complete series which is kind of romantic suspense, where there are a group of kind of men who are kind of ex-military or armed forces or police officers who have got together to basically set up this kind of like protector service, where they not only protect people but also they kind of act as a little bit like vigilantes. So they will track down bad people and dispose of them in cases where the legal process hasn't really worked, and to seek justice, as it were. Now, I said that this is romances, but this very first one that I read, I definitely dove right into the deep end, which is sometimes what I tend to do to myself, and this is an MMM romances. So we are actually following 3 men in this one, Cole, Mace and Jonas. Now Jonas is a relatively young man. He is an artist, and he is basically just about to set up his own art school, and that's what he wants to do, kind of like teaching young children how to draw and paint and all of that sort of stuff. Cole is ex-military. He is basically been you know, in the armed forces. He's seen some really terrible things, and he's kind of ready to retire, and he's come home to find out what happened to his sister, who has been missing for 8 years. And then we have Mace, who is one of our protectors. So Mace belongs to this protection agency, and he has heard that Jonas is a very bad person. In fact, they suspect that he has been doing some very naughty things with the children that he's been teaching, and so Mace has kind of been sent to you know, remove him from the situation. Now when Mace actually turns up, he starts to observe Jonas basically from a distance. He's kind of like, you know, set up surveillance basically to work out the best time when he can eliminate him essentially. But the more he studies Jonas and sees the kind of person he is, the more hesitant he becomes to pull the trigger. And then Cole turns up, also coming with some interest for Jonas, because it seems that he has had something to do with his sister's disappearance and may know something. Now, of course, as these 3 then start to kind of come together to try and figure out what's going on, they realise that Jonas has got some enemies who is maybe trying to get him silenced, which is one of the reasons that Mace has had some misinformation. And then basically Cole and Mace really have to end up working together in order to protect Jonas and remove the bad elements from the situation. But as all 3 of them become much closer with each other, they, you know, form a relationship, and I really enjoyed this book, and I went on to read a couple more in this series. Sloane Kennedy tends to write mainly MM romances, and the rest of that series is all MM romances as well. So if you're intrigued by that, then I'll definitely say to give it a go, because I really did enjoy it, and hope to continue on in that series at some point in the future as well. Now my absolute favourite MM romance that I read recently is God of Fury by Rina, which is book 5 in the Legacy of the Gods series. Now I believe that it's the very first MM romance that Rina has ever written, and I absolutely loved it. I thought it was fantastic. Gave this one 5 stars. And in it we're following Nikolai Sokolov, who is kind of part of the Russian mafia, and Brandon King, who is basically part of a very, very wealthy and powerful family in the UK. Now this whole series, the Legacy of the Gods series, has been very popular over the last 18 months. All of the books are absolutely fantastic, and it's basically 2 colleges set on a fictitious island off the coast of Brighton, basically in the UK, and it's 2 colleges, one that is basically mainly frequented by the kids of the mafia organisations, and one by these really rich elite people from the UK. And so Nikolai and Brandon both go to rival schools, but of course all of their friends have started to you know, pair up, as it were, or entangle themselves in each other's life, and Nikolai and Brandon are then kind of thrown together. So as you read books 1 through to 4, as we build to this 5th book, we do get hints and clues about this couple and what may or may not be going on. But it's an absolutely fascinating read, because both Nikolai and Brandon are fairly troubled men, but in very different ways. Nikolai has some mental health issues in terms of him. He's kind of like got this like manic personality. He's sort of like always fighting to you know, kind of like burn off extra energy, but he's also a very loving sort of guy, because he loves sex, and he loves having sex with all people, no matter their gender, and so he's very, very open about that. Brandon, meanwhile, we've sort of seen him, and he's always appeared like really squeaky clean. He's sort of like the good guy, the nice guy, and is a bit more quiet and shy. But we discover that he's been kind of really hiding this secret, because he too has got some mental health issues brought about by some trauma they experienced in his childhood, and as a result he has developed a lot of coping mechanisms to ensure that he has like very, very strict order in his life. So everything is properly routined, everything is you know, timetabled. He, you know, runs at a certain time every day, he does certain things at a certain time every day, really to keep himself in check and his life in order. Nicola though keeps pressing Brandon's buttons, and he keeps pushing until, you know, he's really under, it gets really under Brandon's skin, and Brandon really tries to resist this sort of relationship between them. In fact, he didn't really even realise that he liked men. He thought he was asexual, in fact, and didn't particularly enjoy having sex with anybody. But things are very different with Nicola, and despite the fact that, like I say, they're very troubled and have got a lot of things that they need to work through, they're absolutely fantastic together. And Nicola ended up being so sweet and protective of Brandon, and I just thought the whole story was absolutely fantastic and really well done, and I would definitely recommend the whole series, but like I say, this book is my favourite, I think, of all of the 6 books in the series. Okay, so the next subgenre I want to talk about is billionaire romances. Now, I've read a lot of romances with billionaires in them. You know, most of the heroes I read are obviously very wealthy individuals. You know, particularly if they're sort of dark or mafia romances, a lot of these men, you know, develop a lot of wealth. So over the years, I have read a lot of romances where one of the main characters has a lot of money. But when I was picking this category in terms of thinking what was my first and what is my favourite, I was actually picking out books that are specifically marketed as billionaire romances, and when I was looking back, I think one of the earliest ones that I kind of recorded having read is The Rule by Maggie Cole, which is book 1 in the All In Billionaire series. And in this one we're following Tom Marco, who is a basically self-made billionaire, but he's also a basketball star, and Liv, who is his PR marketing manager basically. Now Liz has a rule that she doesn't date any of her clients, but Tom definitely really wants to be with Liv, and he is a man that always gets what he wants. So he keeps wearing her down basically until she finally agrees to go and stay with him in his Colorado kind of mansion for a bit of a weekend holiday, and they have a very spicy time while they're there. This is also a little bit of romantic suspense. Something dark has gone on in Tom's background, and you know, it may come back to attempt to either put Liv in danger or kind of ruin their relationship. But obviously it has a HEA, so all is resolved. So when I was going through my list and thinking about, okay, so what is my favourite, I decided that it was probably this one here, Fall Into You by JT Geissinger, and this is book 2 in the Morally Grey series. Now in this one we're following Cole McCord, who is the CFO of his family's company. It's one of the biggest sort of media companies in the world, and they are extremely wealthy people. And then we have our heroine Shay, who ends up going to work at this company as Cole's assistant. However, before Shay starts working for Cole, they actually meet in another way. So she basically is at a bar one night with her friend, and there is a very dark, handsome man sitting in the corner having a drink, and she ends up going over to speak to him. They have an amazing bit of banter, and they end up spending the night together, and they have a fantastic one night stand with each other. They kind of go their separate ways, and then basically she applies for a job, ends up going to the workplace to discover that the guy she's just had a one night stand with is going to be her new boss. Now, while she had a fantastic night with him, the banter was fantastic, they got on really well, a lot of chemistry between them. In real life, shall we say, Cole is extremely grumpy and very difficult to work with. He has very high standards, demands a lot from his assistants, and has found it very difficult over the years to keep one, shall we say. But Shay knows that this job is absolutely fantastic, and if she can stick it out even for 6 months, then, you know, she can pretty much work anywhere she wants in the city. And so she is determined not to let Cole put her off, and he does try and put her off because he is upset that this is the woman that he actually is very attracted to, that they had a fantastic night together, and you know, he is now quite concerned that they're in close proximity together in the workplace, and so he does everything he can basically to push her away, but she is a very, very feisty heroine, and she is not going to be put off by his grumpiness or the way that he treats her. The thing is, we find out a little bit more about Cole, and not only is he a billionaire, but he is also guarding quite a dark secret which he desperately doesn't want Shay to find out about. But the more time they spend together, the more things she uncovers, and the more things she starts to realise about this particular person who is she is definitely falling in love with. So I won't say any more than that because I don't want to spoil it, but I absolutely love this one. As always with JT Geissinger's books, the heroes are absolutely fantastic, and the banter between the couples and also their friends is also really, really good as well, so would highly recommend. Okay, so the next category I want to talk about is BDSM romances. Now, as you know, I read a lot of spicy books, so a lot of books that I read, a lot of spicy books that we read, have some element of BDSM in them in some way, whether that be, you know, bondage or spanking or any of those sorts of things. But when I specifically think about BDSM, I'm thinking about the more kind of formal elements of BDSM, and the dynamics between a dom and a sub, and how they kind of really kind of like drive the relationship, as it were. So the first one that I ever really read that was like this was a book called Come by Becca, Jameson, and it's book 1 in the Fight Club series, because this one is also kind of an MMA fighter romance, which is why I first picked it up, because I'd started to read some MMA fighter romances, was really enjoying them, and came across this one. But this one, yes, does have an MMA fighter element to it, but it also has a really big kind of BDSM element to it as well, and I absolutely loved it, and it's still one of my favourites today. We were following Katie and Rafe in this one. So Rafe is our kind of hero. He is an ordinary guy. He's an accountant by day, but at night he goes to the gym. He is an MMA fighter, so he is an amateur MMA fighter. He hangs out with 5 other men who also go to this fight club and have got various other kind of professional sort of jobs, and collectively they are known as the Fight Club at the gym that they go to, because they train together, they fight together, and they also do competitions at the weekends as well. In addition to that, all of these guys are also heavily into BDSM. They're all doms, and they all go to this sex club where they practice their dominant skills. And then we have Katie, who's the heroine in this one, and she is a lawyer, but she's been having some problems at work where one of her colleagues is kind of stalking her. And one day she's leaving work and she sees that someone is following her. She thinks it's this guy, and so she ends up driving to her uncle's gym, where these men happen to, you know, train and practice. And as she goes into this gym to go and see her uncle, she happens across Rafe, who is fighting in the gym. She finds him very, very attractive. And then she goes to talk to her uncle, and as she's leaving, by this time Rafe is kind of finished at the gym, he's standing outside, and when she comes outside she realises that the guy who's been stalking her is still in the car park kind of waiting for her, and she makes an impulsive decision to basically go up to Rafe and kiss him and pretend like, you know, she's in a relationship with him, in the hopes that it will basically put the stalker off and he won't be stalking her anymore. Of course, Rafe is more than happy to be kissed by Katie because she is a very attractive woman, and he's single, and they kind of then exchange numbers. He takes her for coffee and then they go on a date. Now, she is very interested in him and wants to spend a bit more time with him, but Rafe kind of has this policy, if you like, a rule where he will only have 1 or 2 dates with a woman before he then reveals exactly his taste in the bedroom, because he doesn't want to live in a relationship that doesn't have some sort of dom sub element to it, and he doesn't think it's therefore fair to get into a relationship with a woman without her fully understanding what she's getting into. And he really, really does like Katie, so he decides that he's going to throw her in completely at the deep end, and basically says to her, there's some stuff that I need to tell you, but let me show you everything about me and see if you can handle it, and if you can, great, and if you can't, I fully understand, and we'll just call it quits. The first thing is he takes her to one of his fights, so she ends up going with him to one of his fights, and then after the fight is finished, he basically takes her to the sex club where he kind of shows her around. and explains exactly, you know, what his tastes are. What I really liked about this one is that Katie has no knowledge about this lifestyle whatsoever, but Rafe is really, really patient and kind with her, gives her lots of information, gives her the opportunity to go away and do her own research, and introduces her things to her really slowly, and kind of like tries to work out if this is something she is prepared to do, if she is prepared to be submissive, and what elements of a submissive does she like being, and you know, what certain things does she, you know, what certain things turn her on, and what does she want to do. So I really, really like this one because, like I said, it was the first book that I'd really read that kind of explored BDSM in a bit more detail, and was kind of like a teaching sort of romance as well, where the heroine was learning a lot of things, and the hero was really taking the time to explain to her how it worked and give her the chance, like I said, to do her research and to figure things out for herself. So I really did like that, and the rest of the series is the same. Yeah, would highly recommend. So it was really hard then to come up with a favourite, because like I said, that series was one of the first that I'd read, but also has sort of remained some of my favourite stories from that category. But I think when I'm thinking about BDSM and kind of how it's used for healing in particular, then probably one of the best ones is Savage Tracker by Maggie, and this one is book 5 in the Mafia Wars series. And in this one we are following Obrecht Ivanov, so one of the Ivanov brothers, and a woman called Selena. Now, we'd met Selena in a couple of the books before this, and Selena was in a very bad situation where she was married to a man who had forced her into a master-slave relationship, but it wasn't consensual at all, and like I say, he literally forced her, you know. So she was in a very bad situation for about a decade until she finally was able to escape. And now she is kind of protected by the Ivanovs and living in a block of flats where Obrecht also kind of lives, and he's sort of been keeping his eye on her. Now, as they've sort of spent a bit more time together, they kind of meet occasionally in the building where they live together. Obrecht starts to realise that she still does have submissive tendencies, and he happens to be a top, so he isn't a permanent dominant. He doesn't have women where he you know, has a permanent sub, but he does like to go to a sex club and be a top, basically. So he kind of, like I say, recognises that Selena has submissive tendencies, and also starts to notice that she's going to get herself into a bit of trouble, because although she was in this master-slave relationship and it wasn't consensual, she still craves the need to be sort of dominated, and she doesn't understand it. She's very confused by it. She's a little bit frightened by how she feels, but she kind of wants to explore it more, but she is going about it all wrong and basically joining the wrong kinds of groups, shall we say, and Obrecht realises this and basically forbids her from going to the sex clubs that she signed up to, saying they're not safe. And in the end, he kind of agrees to take her under his wing and show her what being a submissive truly means, and how a dominant should actually be treating her. And so he agrees to do this sort of in the short term, but obviously the more he spends time with her, the more he falls in love with her, the more he realises he's going to need to be her dominant on a more permanent basis. So again, I love this one because we have lots of scenarios in here where Obrecht is really teaching her how things should really be in this kind of situation, and this kind of dynamic, and also using it to really kind of help her work through the past, her past trauma and her feelings about this, until she can really be in a healthy relationship with Obrecht and really kind of you know, explore her real sexual needs, and Obrecht is the perfect man to do that. So again, really enjoyed this one, and would highly recommend. Next up then, I've got contemporary romance, and again, I've read loads of contemporary romances. Even small town romances could be classed as contemporary. So really, when I'm talking about contemporary romances, my first thought was more rom-com style romances. So the first one I think I read, since I've been keeping a record of the books that I've been reading, is Seducing Lola by Jessica Prince, which is book 1 in the Girl Talk series. Now, in this one, we're following Grayson and Lola, and this one is also kind of a workplace romance, a fake dating situation as well. I remember laughing out loud at this one. It's a rom-com and it is very funny, and like I say, I remember just laughing out loud at a couple of scenes in particular that I still remember today, and they were just absolutely hilarious. Now the premise of this one is that Lola is part of Girl Talk, and Girl Talk is this radio chat show where there are a couple of friends, 3 or 4 friends basically, who basically talk on the radio and give relationship advice to women. And Grayson, he is kind of like one of the owners of this sort of like media station, if you like, where this show takes place. But he's kind of a bit of a silent partner, so they don't really see him. It's not like he's directly the boss or anything. However, what happens is that Lola and Grayson kind of have a bit of a meet cute in a coffee shop close by to work. They don't actually know who each other is, but like I say, they have this bit of a meet cute. She bumps into him, spills sort of coffee. They have a bit of banter, and she kind of goes on her way. But she uses the experience with Grayson and kind of what happens as part of her talk show, and then people realise that it's him, and I can't exactly remember the scenario that happens, but it ends up anyway where he is made to look a bit stupid on social media, and she is at risk of maybe losing her job because obviously he's the boss. But then the PR team get involved, like the PR department get involved and basically say, no, this looks really bad all round, so you're now going to have to fake date and be seen in public and make sure everyone knows that you're all friends and everything's all good and everything. Lola then has to start going on dates with Grayson and make public appearances with him, and obviously then they're going to be in close proximity together, and the relationship is going to go from there. So enjoyed that one and would recommend Girl Talk. It's been a couple of years since I read it, back in sort of 2020 probably, but I still remember that I thoroughly enjoyed those ones, and they're very, very funny. So on the same vein then, I think one of my favourites that I've read in the last couple of years is A Deal with the Devil by Elizabeth O'Rourke, and this is book 1 in the Grumpy Devils series. So this is sort of another workplace romance. It's dubbed as enemies to lovers, but they're not really enemies. But the couple in this one is Hayes and Hallie. Hayes is a British doctor who lives in you know, Hollywood basically, and he's a plastic surgeon to the stars, so very, very wealthy, very, very attractive, but also a little bit obnoxious. He is extremely grumpy to work for. It's very demanding, has very exacting standards. Obviously he you know, makes a lot of money doing what he's doing, and also he's got a lot of famous clients. In his personal life he's a bit of a ladies man, but he's one of those guys that got his heart broken many years before, and now he vows never to fall in love again, and so he never dates the same woman twice. And you know, he's got a bit of a bad reputation as a ladies man and someone who doesn't particularly treat women that well. Now he has a personal assistant who happens to be a man, but he is going away on an extended break to Europe, and therefore Hayes is in need of a new personal assistant in the interim. Now they can't find anyone to do this job because, like I say, he's so grouchy and no one really wants to do the job at all. So his assistant gets one of his very best friends to do it, who happens to be Hallie, and he's like, please, 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 no one else will do it, but I can't go on holiday till I've found an assistant for Hayes, please will you do it? Now she is actually an author, but she's struggling to finish her book and she's really, really behind on her deadline, so desperately needs the money to keep paying her rent and stuff. So she finally agrees that she is going to basically be Hayes' personal assistant, but she's heard so many bad things about him from her best friend that they really do get off on the bad foot, because she agrees to do this, but she is very begrudgingly doing it, and she already has a very low opinion of Hayes. And when she first starts working for him, she has to do terrible things like you know, order flowers for girls that he's kicked out in the morning and won't see again, and even had to kind of like correct some errors where he's double booked himself and 2 women are expecting to go on a date with him, and she kind of has to then ring one of them to let them down, and so she has to do a lot of these things to fix these you know, relationships he's had with these women where he's not treated them very well, and so her opinion gets even lower of him basically. As she spends more time with him, she gets to know him, she gets under some of the layers that he's put up, and she starts to break down some of his barriers and some of his walls, and she starts to realise that actually he is a pretty good guy underneath it all, and he's not exactly what he seems, and there's an underlying reason why he's behaving that way. And I just absolutely love the banter between these two. I thought she dealt with him so brilliantly. She always had a great comeback, and yeah, just thoroughly enjoyed the read. also the slow burn between these two, and then when they finally get together, the chemistry is fantastic, so would highly recommend. Okay, so my last subgenre for today is pop star romances. Unlike some of the other books in here, I've said that I'm only going to talk about the first one I read from when I started to record the books I read. However, there is one book that I've loved since 1989, and in fact the hero in this one is my top book boyfriend of all time, so you've probably heard me talking about this very recently, therefore I won't labour on the point too much. But my very first pop star romance that I ever read was this one here, Easy Connection. It's actually part of a duet, so there's two books, Easy Connection, and the second book is Easy Freedom. And basically this follows two characters, Kathy and Dev. Dev is a lead guitarist in a very, very famous rock band called Easy Connection, and he's just come back from a world tour, and basically when he gets home he bumps into Kathy, who is a 17-year-old girl. She's just finished her A-levels, she's just about to go off to college, and she's a very, very good artist, and she just happens to be painting in his back garden. Now he doesn't realise that she is there by mistake, and he thinks she is kind of like a groupie, that she's deliberately there to, you know, see him, and he is not too happy about this, but he invites her to stay for dinner. One thing leads to another, they end up spending the night together. The thing is, he absolutely thought from the get-go that she was there because she was a groupie and she wanted to be with him, but that was not the case at all. In fact, she didn't even really know who he was, and had heard their songs but didn't know what the band members looked like or anything. Now he's an extremely handsome guy, so she is attracted to him, and therefore he kind of misreads the signals, and unbeknownst to him she is a virgin and doesn't want to spend the night with him. But like I say, there is a bit of miscommunication, and things don't end up too well for Kathy. Dev doesn't realise the full extent of what's happened until the following morning, when she has run off and he can't find her, and then he basically tries to track her down to figure out what's going on. Meanwhile, several weeks and months pass. Kathy settles into life in London. She's definitely hiding, she's trying not to be found, but she realises that she is pregnant, and now things are going to get really difficult for her. So that's all I'll say about this one. I've talked about it in great length previously, but I absolutely love this, absolutely love this whole world. And Liz Berry, who's the author of this one, also has done a number of other young adult, new adult stories about pop stars, and I've really enjoyed them. But they are very old books. They were written back in the late 1980s, and like I said, they are kind of YA stories. So those are my absolute favourite pop star romances of all time. I don't think I'm ever going to get over them. But more modern, bringing a slightly more modern and up to date, probably the one that I've enjoyed the most in recent years is Corrupt by Jessica Prince, which is book one in the Civil Corruption series. And in this one we have Garrett, who is the drummer of a band called Civil Corruption, also a very famous band. And this starts with another kind of one night stand, if you like, with a lady called Gwen. Now Gwen also doesn't realise that Garrett is part of this band. She just happens to go to a party with her friend. She's a bit overwhelmed, there's lots of people there, it's a very, very big house, and so to get away from things she kind of goes upstairs to an empty room, except the room isn't empty and Garrett is there, and they spend a couple of hours talking to each other, getting to know each other, really, really enjoying each other's company, and they end up spending the night together. It's not till the following morning, when she is literally kicked out of bed by Garrett's assistant, that she realises Garrett was one of the band members. And so she leaves. She's very embarrassed because she's been kicked out. Garrett doesn't even bother to say goodbye because she thought they really had a moment together. Now, a couple of weeks pass and she realises she's pregnant, so she tries to get in touch with Garrett to let him know. Of course, all she's going to do is get through to his management team, who basically don't believe her story. And in the end, they kind of get the lawyers on the case to do a paternity test, and Garrett is not too nice to her because he thinks that she's got herself pregnant deliberately to try and trick him. And so he is a real douche at the start of this story, and basically she decides that she doesn't want to take any of his money, she doesn't want to get any support from him. And so although he's kind of asked to pay child maintenance because he is the father, she ends up putting it in to a savings account for her daughter and doesn't kind of want to touch it, and kind of returns anything that he sends that's kind of extra, if you like. So 3 or 4 years actually pass where nothing really happens. She's just bringing up her daughter by herself, and he's just sending, you know, child support checks to her, which he kind of doesn't really ever cash. 3 or 4 years in though, he starts to have a bit of a change of heart, and also unexpectedly Gwen cashes one of his checks. So he's very intrigued by this, and he goes to see her, and then he realises that the reason she cashed one of his checks is because her daughter was actually sick and she needed medical attention. And then Garrett starts to take a bit more interest about what's going on, and then starts to ask if he can start to see his daughter and build up kind of this relationship with her. Gwen is not too happy about it to start off with. Obviously the relationship between Gwen and Garrett has not been great over the years, and so she's very, very reluctant. But Garrett has got some time off between tours, and he basically says, why don't you come and stay with me in my house basically, and then I can spend more time with my daughter, and things will just be easier for you. And so Gwen very, very reluctantly agrees, and they do this. So then they become kind of like roommates, if you like, and then they're in close proximity to each other. And as Garrett starts to realise the kind of woman that Gwen really is, how great a mother she is, how fantastic his daughter is, he starts to realise that everything that happened between them, and what he thought had happened, and the fact that she was you know, deliberately kind of like slept with him and got herself pregnant and all of that, he starts to realise that none of that was true, and he got the whole situation wrong basically, and then kind of has to then do a little bit of grovelling to try and win Gwen over so that they can basically get their HEA. So I really, really love this one, and also we get to find out way more about the other band members and some of the other women that are going to be in this story, and the whole series I thoroughly enjoyed and thought it was really great. Some really great characters in here. So that concludes part 2 of my first and favourite subgenre edition. I hope you really enjoyed that. If you did, please give me a thumbs up. Remember to subscribe to the channel if you want to see more content from me, and all that's left to say is thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye! Okay, so there we go. That is 8. So there you go. That concludes part 2 of the subgenre edition. Checks to her basically. Alimony checks to her. Not alimony like, but so the first one that I remember reading since, like I say, since I've been recording. So the first one that I actually read since I've been sort of, so since I've been keeping a record of the books that I've been reading, one of the first ones, no, that's not what I want to say. So but this starts in a very similar way to other romances. And in that book we're following Chase, which is the title of the book, and in that book we were following Chase, the title. Bye, and I hope to see you next time.